Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday sew along. We're going to wait just a second and let everyone catch up with us. And we've got several people already on. So happy Valentine's Day. Today is a nice, windy, sunny day right now. It's been raining, but thank goodness the rain has stopped, although we welcome the moisture. So tonight we're going to be doing the next block in our Blockbusters series, and I'll be talking about that in just a minute. Before we do, just a couple of things to remind you of. For those of you who are not aware, we are participating in the 20th annual Spring Fling Shop Hop. So this will be our 20th year, and I even have a picture. I got to find it, see where I put it. I have a picture of our Spring Fling Shop Hop quilt. So each shop, there's 6 shops that are participating this year. Each shop has a 12-inch block that we have traded. So everybody has the same 6 blocks, and then each shop builds a quilt around that. So this is a picture of our quilt. It's hanging in the shop behind my machine, so you can see it in person here at the shop. As you visit the shops on the shop hop, each shop will have a kit available for their block. And then if you find a setting that you like, you can purchase a kit for that setting. So this is our version of our Spring Fling 2023. And this is our 20th year. Each shop will have some little goodie for you as you visit the shop. So you get a passport at the first shop you visit and get it stamped at all your stops, and turn it in at the last shop for to be eligible for the prizes. And we have some really nice prizes as well. So don't miss the 20th Spring Fling. And then also we have several classes that are going to be coming up. So I have put them in a chart. So on the right side of the screen right now is the quilt called Buttermilk Winter. That class is coming up, and your choice of Saturday, February 18th or Thursday, February 23rd. We do have a kit available, so if you would like a kit, be sure and let us know. We can put that aside. You can purchase the class on our website, or you can call the shop and sign up. And it's available in person or via Zoom. So that's coming up. And then on the left side of the screen is the quilt called Morning Star. That one is actually coming up in March 9th on Thursday. So that one's coming up as well. And the one on the right, I forgot to say, the one on the right does not take any special tools. The left project takes the wedge star tool. And so those are 2 classes coming up. And then behind me on the wall is the feathered star. We're going to be doing the bigger one. There's actually 2 up there. One's a little one, and then the bigger one's 28 inches. It's the center of a medallion quilt called Vintage Memories. I always say, or Moments. I'm not sure which it is. But it is a great project that we're going old school. It's not a trim down project. You actually have to do some Y seams and some strategic placement, and so I'll be showing you some tricks for that as well. Vintage Moments. So this is, I keep saying it wrong too. So Vintage Moments, it is actually a book that's been out for several years. It's still available, and it is very well written. I do make a few changes to how I did the pieces that go into it, but that's a class coming up. It is your choice of February 25th, which is a Saturday, or Friday, March the 3rd. And that one is also available in person or via Zoom here at the shop. So those are a couple of things to be thinking about. Now, tonight's block is block number 21, called Around the Block. If you've been following along, you've noticed we've skipped block 19 and 20. And the reason is Blockbuster 19 and 20 are both Lemoyne Star blocks. So you can download those and make those on your own if you want. I do recommend that you get the Lemoyne Star tool. It's a really cool way of making the Lemoyne star. That's not one of the tools that I use for our sew-along demonstrations. I do teach classes using the Lemoyne star tool, as well as the wedge star tool and star 60 tool, all of the specialty star tools. So if any of those are a class you would like, you can call the shop or email me and get on the waiting list for the next class that we have using those tools. So I'm very familiar with all of those tools. I design with all of the Studio 180 design tools. So it is something I do recommend. I'm just not using those for our sew-alongs. So tonight's block is called Around the Block. It's actually kind of a review of several units we've done before. So several blocks we've done. Let me grab one off the wall because I want to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the blocks. Lots of the blocks that we're using are actually 9-patch blocks. Let me move this out of the way so you don't get confused. This has 9 equal sections of the block. And each section has some piecing in it. It doesn't have to be just a plain square, although it could be. And you can insert other units in any of these positions. So this is a 9-patch block. The block for tonight is not. It's actually a 16-patch. And by that I mean, if you count it over, it's a 4 grid, 4 across and 4 down. So that makes 16 units. They can be, like this unit is actually 2 of the units in the 16 patch. Some people call it a 4 patch because it actually has a 4 grid in the corners. The only thing is since you're making some flying geese, they take up 2 of your positions. So that plays into whether you call it a 4 patch, a 16 patch. You could even put this part together and then you have 9 sections, and this part is an uneven 9 patch because the center section is wider than the corners. So depending on how you're putting it together, that plays into how big each of these units are. So since we're in a 4 grid, 4 by 4, each section has to be a 3-inch finished section. So this one's 3-inch. Each of these is 3-inch. This one is 3-inch by twice that, 6-inch. So that is the way this block is put together. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the flying geese. We're going to start with that because we're going to do 2 different sections using the Tucker trimmer. The flying goose tool we use is our wing clipper tool. It looks like this, and this should be review if you've been following along with our blocks. So on your sheet that you download with the cutting instructions, it's going to have 1 large square and 4 small squares for you to work with to make a set of 4 flying geese. And so I'm going to show you the chart. Sometimes it's easier to kind of follow the chart to see how we determine what you cut to start with. So for our first, let me get rid of this chart because that was from last week. For our wing clipper units, we are going to start with, up in the top corner, there's a, let me get this back on top. There is a little chart right here that says you're going to start with your large square 1.5 inches larger than the width of your finished size, and your small squares are 1 inch larger than the height of your finished size. So our finished size on this particular flying goose is 3 by 6. That means that our small squares are all going to be 1 inch larger, so they're going to be 4 inches, and our large square is going to be 7.5 inches because it's 1.5 inches larger than the width of our goose. So this is what we're actually going to start with, and that's what I have cut here. I have my large square and my 4 small squares. I've already drawn my 2 sewing lines using my magic wand, and I'm going to place 2 squares across. I'm going to pull this out so you can see it. I'm going to place 2 small squares face down on the large square. So some people like to put their small squares on, pin them on before they start sewing, but I want to show you what I typically do. I'm going to start with the upper corner of my large square, and I'm going to place my small square on top. Now, with our method that we're using, you want to start with just a little bit of the back square showing. Let's see if I can show you that. You're going to scoot in just 3 or 4 threads, just enough to be able to see this back larger square. And that's how you're going to start. And I actually only put the 1 small square on top to start with before I start sewing. And then I'm just going to stitch right down my line. I want to stitch just right at the inside edge of that line. And I typically stitch about halfway across, and then I stop. I don't know why the glare is showing because I don't have my light on, but for some reason my overhead lights are glaring today. Then I'm going to take another square and I'm going to layer it on. They should match up here. And then at the back end of this, where I put my smaller square on, I again want to scoot in toward the center, just 2 or 3 threads, just enough to kind of be able to see the back. This gives me the wiggle room I need when it's time to trim at the end. So if I don't do that, sometimes it's hard to get that trimming done the way I want it to come out. So I'm going to stitch across to the other side. If I'm doing several of these blocks, because I could decide to make several of these blocks and put them together in a large quilt, I would do assembly line sewing. I would just grab another large square, add 2 of my squares on top, and stitch across. If possible, it's always more efficient to do assembly line stitching. It saves thread, it keeps your work more tidy, you don't have as much of a snarl of threads to deal with. So that is something to think about. So I've got my 2 lines of stitching across my 2 squares. So then I'm going to take this to the overhead camera so you can see what I do next. Let me find that camera. The first thing I'm going to do is cut this apart. And I'm just going to grab something that will get across point to point and cut in between the lines. And then I'm going to press that. Now, I like to finger press my small triangles back. This gives me a chance to make sure my seam allowance is going the way I want it to go, and I run less of a chance of distorting this bias seam than if I took this and just set the iron down and started nudging it. With it finger pressed so that I know the seam is going the way I want it to, then I'm going to, my iron is running away, I'm going to have a better time getting this to lay down the way I want it to. So I'm going to press that, and then if you're using the acorn pressing pin, this is when you would grab it, give it just a little swipe with the acorn pressing pin. That puts just a little bit of a starch type product on your seam so you're not distorting. If you're going to use starch or steam or best press or the acorn pressing solution, because you can buy that in a bottle and put it in a spray bottle, if you're going to use any of those products, unless you're using the acorn pressing pin, you want to start by pressing everything before you cut anything out. The pressing pin seems to not distort anything because you're only putting it right on the seam, so you don't have to worry too much about distortion. So then I'm going to take these 2 shapes back to the sewing surface. And I have 2 shapes that are kind of like a heart. It's Valentine's Day, so why not? So we're going to grab another of our smaller squares, and again, I'm going to scoot away from the corner toward what was the center of my larger square, and I scoot in 2 or 3 threads, and then I'm going to stitch right on the lines like I did before. So I'm going to go right along the line. Now that chart I showed you at the beginning, you can actually slide back and look at that again. It shows this process that I'm stitching just as a review. And again, don't forget to scoot toward the center. That's the mistake. If people make a mistake on this process, that's the mistake they make. I will tell you, there's a few of the certified instructors that have started cutting those small squares just a bit bigger so they don't have to scoot toward the center. I'm so used to doing that little scoot that I don't worry about cutting that a little bit bigger, but you could if that helps you. It's easier to remember 1 inch larger and not have to think about that and just go 1 inch larger than the finished height of my goose for that square. So once I get this stitched on, I've got all of the stitching done on my flying goose and I'm ready to trim. So let me get this cut apart. We'll go to the overhead camera so you can see what comes next. This is not new. If you've watched before, I'm doing exactly like we've done before. So I've got my second square stitched on. I'm just going to grab something to cut against and cut between the lines and do that with both of them. That gives me 4 flying geese. They're all just a bit oversized so I can trim those down and get the precision I want. Again, I'm going to finger press that seam and set my iron on it. And I typically stack them like this so that they get just a little bit of extra time underneath the heat of the iron. And I do this all the time. If I've got 30 of these, I'm going to be stacking several at a time until they get to where they're just kind of wanting to tip over, and then I start a new stack. So I'm going to grab my acorn pressing pin, and I know that this is the side that needs the pressing solution. And since I'm only doing 4, I'm just going to give all 4 of them just a little swipe. Doesn't take a lot. And then set the iron on them. Let the iron do the work. I think maybe I twisted that one, so I think this is actually the seam I put that on. And now I'm ready to trim. So if you are right-handed, you're going to turn the flying goose where the V points toward you. If you're left-handed, point it to the right like this. And you're going to line up the diagonal lines on your ruler to match up with the diagonal seams. So if I'm left-handed, I'm going to put this long common diagonal on the top seam every time, no matter what size I'm making. Then I will be matching up one of these other lines with the other seam. Since I'm right-handed, I'm actually going to hold mine this way. So the long common diagonal goes on the right seam, and then I'm just going to slide it into place till it gets to line up with the proper line. And I don't have a lot of excess to trim. A couple of things that I want you to notice. Right now, I have the lines properly placed, and there's just a tiny sliver all the way around the 3.5 by 6.5 inch measurement to trim away. If I happen to get it on the wrong line and I have a lot to trim away, that's a big red flag to say you don't have your line in the right place. If I get it on this line and there's nothing to trim away, again, I know I need to go back and look at where I have my placement. So as long as you place this line first and slide it into place and see that you have just a sliver all the way around the outside to trim, you're going to be trimming it properly. And there's not a lot of waste, just enough to get the precision you're after. Once you get the first 2 sides trimmed, then you're going to put the 6.5 by 3.5. In this case, it depends on the size you're making, but those 2 lines are going on your cut edges. That will leave a bold X right at the tip so you're not chopping off your goose's beak. And you have a perfectly trimmed flying goose. And you're going to do that with all 4 geese. So any questions about flying geese while we're going, before we go to the next unit? Tony's today, so she can monitor our comment section. She says there's no question, so I must be explaining really clearly. So that's the basic process for flying geese. And of course, there's lots of different things you can do. You can use other colors. You don't have to use the colors I used. I'm just going to skip these and go to the next unit because they're going to be trimmed the very same way. That's the wing clipper. Now we're going to be doing the next unit, which is the corner unit, and it's just a simple half square. So in order to get a simple half square, whatever your finished size, you're going to add 1 inch. So this needs to be a 3-inch finished half square. That means I had a 4-inch square of my background and a 4-inch square of this print. I put them face to face. I drew my 2 lines on using my magic wand, and I stitched them already because I wanted to do this fairly quickly and get to the other unit that's in the center. I'm just going to cut right across the center, and I'm ready to put these together and trim them. So the first thing I'm going to do is press, and I'm going to press in this case toward my print, not the background, even though my background has a little print. I'm pressing toward the one that has color. I could also choose to press this open. That's kind of I'm going to say a recent thing. When I first started quilting, 35 years ago, nobody pressed pressed open. We all pressed to the side. Now you can actually choose, and there's not really a right or wrong. Just in case you didn't know it, there really are no quilt police. It's your quilt. You get to decide what you do. So I'm just going to give them all a quick press, and then I'm going to grab my acorn pressing pin, give it just a little swipe, and set the iron on it while I get the others ready. And like I said, it doesn't take a lot of the solution. I have my little board that's under my pressing mat has gotten just a little warped, and it doesn't, it tends to want to make my iron just kind of slide off to the side, so I have to pay attention. So now I'm going to trim using the Tucker trimmer. Now, a couple of things I wanted to talk about. First of all, if you like a textured surface or a non-slip surface, there is a product called Invisigrip. It's a static cling plastic vinyl, I guess, sheet that goes on the back of your ruler. And it doesn't have to completely cover the whole surface of the ruler, although if you use a piece of Invisigrip big enough to cover the whole back, it protects the lines that are on your ruler because they do wear off. But I have just a little bit of Invisigrip on here. As a general rule, I don't use it, but a lot of people like it. So I'm demonstrating with it. All I have to do is put this long diagonal line on my seam, and I want to make sure that I have enough room all the way around my 3.5-inch square so that when I trim, I get a 3.5-inch square and I don't have any excess other than that. So you don't have very much to trim away. Often it's really just that triangle ear that I would have cut off with my scissors anyway. So I'm just going to do that again. If you are right-handed, you would put the half circle icon in the top right corner of your unit. That's your indicator that you're trimming on the side that is 1/2-inch measurements. On the other corner is a whole circle, and it's indicating whole inch measurements. So that's where you would place your icon if you were cutting a 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch, 5-inch, whatever whole measurement. But since this is a half measurement, a 3.5-inch square, I'm going to put the half circle on the top right. If you're left-handed, simply put it on the top left, and you're going to cut up the left side first and across. I'm not going to try that because then we'd be looking for Band-Aids for me. So I'm just going up the right side across the top. And I just keep doing that until I get my 4 half squares trimmed and I have precise units to put in my block. Now for the center section of this block, I'm going to save that last one and cut it later. I'm going to be making combo units. A combo unit is quarter squares on one side and a half square on the other side. But I wanted you to notice something about these combo units. The way I made these, I have 4 combo units that are all oriented the same way. By that I mean that the red is in the same position in each of these 4 units. The white is in the same position. But if I'm making the instructions that come with the ruler packaging for combo units, this is what I would get. Notice that they are opposite. They're a mirror image. And many times that's what I want. I want the mirror image where they are opposite each other. But for this block, since it's kind of a double pinwheel, I want all of my reds to be oriented on the same place. So we're going to be using a technique that's called non-mirror combo units. And I'm going to show you how I did that. First of all, if you don't have the non-mirror combo unit technique sheet, it is something you will probably want to get. Let me get back to here so you can see. The non-mirror combo units has a couple of things to help you know what it's doing. First of all, it's the Tucker Trimmer one. The technique sheet explains that this is the tool you'll be using. There's also the stars that are your level of difficulty indicator. Don't let that scare you because there are some of the technique sheets, they're only 2 stars. I don't really see them as easier than this. You just have to do step by step the instructions that are on the technique sheet. And also don't forget, there is a video for all of the technique sheets. So you can sit down with the technique sheet, watch the video, and see the explanation of how to use the tool. So on this particular unit, when I made this combo unit that they were a mirror image, I would actually have another set because of the way you make this. So I would have 2 of these and 2 of these after starting with 1 background square, 1 red square, and 2 blue squares. Now, I'm using a different blue, but the same process is going to would give me the same results. So what I'm going to be doing is that non-mirror combo unit technique. So the first thing I'm going to do on the non-mirror combo unit is draw my sewing lines on the back of one of my squares. And I chose to draw it on the back of my background square just because it's a little easier to see. But this time I'm actually going to draw lines going both directions. So I'll show you how I do that. I've already drawn lines going one direction. I'm going to also draw lines going the opposite direction. So I have a double X on the back of my square. I think you can see that. It's fairly faint. I used a lighter blue on the second time, but I can see it, and I think you'll be able to see it as I stitch. So then I'm going to pair up the 2 pieces that eventually become that quarter of my unit. So my red square and my background square. And I've got them buddied up together, and I'm going to stitch. But this time, instead of going all the way across both of my sides, I'm going to stitch, and when I get to the middle, I'm going to cross over and come down the opposite side. So I'm going to start on the right side of those 2 lines. So just stitch across here. And when I get to the middle, you'll see what I'm going to do. This is the process for making those non-mirror combo units. I'm going to stitch across and then When I get to the other side, I'm going to park my needle on the fabric tag. And I'm going to do the same thing with the opposite lines. So I'm going to start on the right side, stitch across to the middle, and cross over. And finish on the left side of this double line. And that's really the trick for setting this up to be able to do a non-mirror combo unit. So now we're going to the overhead camera and the iron so you can see what we're going to do next in order to get this unit. So I'm going to just move these out of the way. That's my non-mirror units that I took off of my design board. And I'm going to cut corner to corner, both directions. Now, I want to make sure I handle this with care because I'm going to have an exposed bias edge. Before this side, when I had that, let me put this back together so you can see what I'm talking about. When I have this in my square, all the outside edges are straight of the grain, and I've stitched across the bias. When I open this up to press, I'm going to have my bias edge exposed, and so it can be really easy to stretch that out of shape. So I want to handle that with care, but I'm going to open all of these up and I'm going to press. This time, in this case, I'm going to press toward my red triangle, and notice they're all four going to lean the same direction. That's what I want in order to make a non-mirror combo unit. This is a pretty handy little technique to learn, and I would encourage you to get the non-mirror combo unit technique sheet. We have those in stock because it will help you remember how to put all of those together and get that technique down. So I'm just going to quickly, I gave them a quick little press with my iron, and now I'm going to put them back underneath the iron while I grab the acorn pressing pin, give it just a little bit of a swipe, and then I'll show you what comes next. So notice I'm not doing a lot of handling of these pieces because, like I said, I want to be careful with this long edge because that's a bias edge. So I'm going to pick all of those up and go back to the sewing area and show you what comes next. So this time I have to have my blue squares, the one that is going to end up being the opposite side of my quarter squares. The half square part in this case is blue. So I'm going to buddy up these pieces. I'll line that up opposite one of these. And notice when I get that in place, they are not the same size as my blue square. That's fine, and it actually works in your favor because you don't have to fuss with it to try to get it to line up, and you're going to have plenty of room to do your trimming. I like to pin this one just because it will hold it in place till I get it stitched. And I'm just going to put those right together where they're just barely touching. And you know, if you've watched me very much, I don't pin a lot, but I do pin this. Now, it does have a little bit of a line here where I drew that double line across before. I don't bother to continue that line across the red square because I'm using a patchwork foot on my machine. So all I really have to do this time is follow along the patchwork foot along the edge of this long bias edge of my triangle. Now you may want to take the pins out as you get to them. If you decide to sew over your pins, you want to slow down so you don't bust a needle. knock your machine out of time. I'll show you. If you're going to sew over a pin, slow down so that you know that you can get over it without damaging your machine. So I've got another one to do. I'll just grab it, get it ready, and I'll do assembly line style. That's actually more efficient. And notice the two red triangles end up opposite each other, like this, and the two white triangles end up opposite each other. And I'm going to pin it. You could also use the seam-align glue. Some people like the seam-align glue, and I often do. Sometimes if I have a whole bunch of these, I would just sit in my recliner with my seam-align glue and get them all ready and carry the whole stack of them back down to stitch later. But since I'm only doing one set, I'm just going to pin it. When I get to the pin, either stop, slow down and take it out, or carefully stitch across it. Just following the edge of my presser foot along the edge of that triangle. On one side, I'm just going to sew onto my fabric tag and park my needle, and I'm going to clip and do the other side. So this time I've already got them pinned, and when I get to here, we'll just take that pin out. When I get to the next square, just carefully stitch across. And I've got the first pin and the second pin to get out of my way this time. It's just a really cool way of making that combo unit that is not mirrored, because sometimes you don't want that mirror image. There are some patterns, I even have one called Scrappy Sparkle, that you want the mirrored combo. This particular block, you don't want it to be mirrored. So that also plays into how you put it together. So let's go to the overhead camera so you can see what I do next with this. So I've got this stitched, and all I have to do now is cut between the stitching lines. And I'm actually only cutting the blue one. I may actually have a tiny sliver from my two triangles that get cut at the same time, but I'm really more interested in just cutting between my stitching lines on that blue square that I put all of those triangles on. So I'm going to press, and this time I'm going to press toward my blue square. And like I said, depending on what color you're working in, you may decide you don't want to press toward the bigger triangle. There may be a reason you want to press toward the two smaller triangles, and you can certainly do that. You could also press open. Sometimes pressing open is a decision you make according to how it's going to be quilted. If you like to do a lot of stitch in the ditch, pressing open may not be your best option, so you kind of have to weigh all of those things when deciding which way to press. So I've got all four of my non-mirror combo units stitched. We'll give them just a little acorn pressing solution. And remember, if you can't see the acorn pressing solution when you run the pressing pin down it, that does not mean there isn't any on there. Some fabrics just don't show up. And you can be assured that there's still enough pressing solution in there to flatten out those seams the way you want them to. So here's the really cool thing about a tucker trimmer. If you are trimming a half square, you really only have one seam to worry about. You're going to line that up on the long common diagonal. Or you could turn it this way and find the sizing line and line that up on the seam. Where this is particularly helpful, when you have two diagonal seams that meet or cross over the center, I can find that specific place on my tucker trimmer and make sure that stays precisely in the center of my unit. That's helpful on an hourglass unit, that's helpful on a combo unit, and some other units as well. So this long diagonal is going to go on one seam. The cross diagonal on the size that I am making is going on the opposite seam. So this has to be a 3.5 inch square so that it'll finish at 2 inches. So I've got the common diagonal here, the long diagonal with the 3.5 inch line goes on the cross seam, and I'm going to trim away 2 sides and turn and trim the other 2. Now you are actually going to trim more away from the side that is a half of a square than you do on the 2 sides that's a quarter of a square. That's just the nature of how this works. So it is trimming properly if you have more left on that you're trimming away from the blue side than you do the other side. And I want to show you a couple of things. Okay, both of these I placed with that sizing line on the long seam, and the short seam I placed on the solid common diagonal. But notice if I place it the other direction, it still works. I put the long common diagonal on the long seam, find the sizing line, this case 3.5 inches, that goes on that short seam, and where it crosses over the center, I know that is the precise center of my combo unit. So I can trim and end up with the properly placed center of my unit, and the block is the unit is the size I need for the block to fit properly. So I would need 4 of those like I had on my design board a minute ago. And when you place them, they're going to actually make a double pinwheel. Now I could actually turn this a quarter turn and make a white pinwheel. I got to turn them the right way. So you get to decide which way you want that. This actually makes a double pinwheel, a white pinwheel and a red pinwheel in the center, and then almost like a square and a square version around the outside. So that's an option. I did want to show you another double pinwheel that I've made. These are all 1-inch finished units. You can do that with your Tucker trimmer, and this is trimming it with the 1.5 inch measurement, and this whole block will finish as 2 inches, where this section is going to finish as 6 inches. So you can do some really fun things with the Tucker trimmer just by changing the size of the units you're using. I'm going to turn it back around this way. And when you press it, the way I pressed it, where I have all of the units pressed toward the blue, they will nest together here and fit, and I won't have to fight it to get those units. I'm just going to flip this over and show you. Because if I'm stitching these together the way I would here, my seams will nest and they'll fit together perfectly. Okay, so any questions, Tony, that I need to deal with? No. I'll stitch the rest of this together and have it on the wall behind me next time so you can see how it actually ends up looking. So until next time, happy sewing. We'll see you live at 5 next Tuesday, and we'll be ready for the next block in our Blockbuster Bash series. So happy Valentine's Day.